Chapter 3. First, the Eastern Bank. 1. The Temples of the Great Gods during the Imperial Era. Introduction. If Egypt is to be viewed as a vast museum of ancient Egyptian antiquities, we have to acknowledge that the kings of the New Kingdom did everything within their power to make Egypt as huge as it was. Their motivation for doing so stemmed from their desire to build tombs and temples that would endure forever, which was made possible by the ease with which they could obtain high-quality local stones, their growing wealth, and their competition to please the gods and goddesses. The temples dedicated to the gods are also known as temples of daily service for the god's sacred statue. Every day, the high priest, acting on behalf of the king, while praying and using incense purses the sacred statue with water and natron, anoints it with perfumes, and presents it with offerings. The temple is the dwelling place of the Godhead Nether, where offerings and religious and rituals of worship were performed in his honor. When constructing their temples to commemorate themselves in the New Kingdom, the kings also favored the style that was designated for god and goddess temples during this time. This style went on to become the standard in the following eras. Roughly speaking, the design, order, and style of the king's memorial temples were derived from those of temples used for the daily service of the gods. The basic design of the Temple of God includes a pylon, an open courtyard or peristyle, a hall of columns or hypostyle hall, and the Holy of Holies or sanctuary at the end of the temple, in addition to a few chambers for the daily needs of the temple. The main parts of the temple are arranged along a single axis, which divides them along a straight, luxurious road that begins at the entrance to the Holy of Holies. According to Anwar Shukri, this road was used by religious processions as well as by the king took to the god shrine. The statue of God, carried by priests on their shoulders, is taken outside the temple to receive the king or to visit other gods' temples. Among the most significant customs in ancient Egyptian religion were religious festivals and gods paying each other visits. Among the most significant customs in ancient Egyptian religion were religious festivals and gods paying each other visits. It is consistent with the processions that the god statue travels directly from the shrine to the exterior of the temple, particularly if one of the celebration's rituals involved bringing the statue outside in a boat with priests and statesmen surrounding it. The gods' temples were typically constructed by the ancient Egyptians at the coast of the Nile, either perpendicular to or parallel to the river's course. A dock or small harbor on the Nile itself, or on a canal that connected to it, was the begging of some of the temples. First and foremost, this was done so that, during holy seasons and festivals, the god statue would sail on his hallowed boat to pay a visit to another temple deity. Second, to allow ships that are loaded with the gifts and grants of kings and the excellent goods that belong to God to dock there. A broad, spacious boulevard that began at the shoreline runs along both sides in front of the Karnak complex. It is shaped like a Syro-sphinx with a ram's head, symbolizing the god Amun, maybe to protect the temple and draw attention to its central axis. This road was known by the ancient Egyptians as Wat Nether, which means the root of God, or Dramos. The Karnak complex's Avenue of Rams was referred to as Tamet Rehened, which is also translated as the Avenue of Rams. The temple's entrance, which is reached via the Avenue of the Rams, is a massive, tall entryway set inside a massive stone pylon. It was referred to as Bekinet, which means pylon, beginning in the 18th dynasty and as Roti Wurdi beginning in the 20th dynasty. Pylon is how the Greeks termed it. The temple was a massive structure with two enormous towers, with a rectangular base, and inwardly sloping walls that become thinner and shorter as they risen higher. The top of each wall had a torus that encircled the edges, and the pylon terminated with what is known as the Egyptian cornice. Compare this to the hieroglyphic Ake symbol, which depicts the sun rising between two mountains. The traditional scene that adorns the pylon depicts the ruling king ordering its erection while he crushes and suppresses a handful of surrendered foes. Later, it turned into a location to immortalize the king's military triumphs. As a result, we can summarize the objective of this enormous structure into 3 points. First, perhaps to protect the entryway. Second, maybe as a place to document the king's military triumphs. Third, those entering the temple may be filled with awe at its immensity and a sense of its sacredness. Flagpoles were installed to these pylons and positioned within specially designed vertical grooves on the pylon facade. Their number differed from one pylon to another depending on the size and magnitude of each pylon. 2 cedar or cypress wood flagpoles adorned the facade of a tiny pylon, which was ending by colored flags. The number of flags varied, ranging from more than 4 on most large pylon facades to 8 on very large pylon facades. On the facade of the Temple of Aten at Tel El Amarna, there were 10 flagpoles. The flags were white, green, blue, and red in color. The flagpoles served a dual purpose, first to decorate and beautify the site and, second, to ward off evil from this hallowed location. Compare it with the Nathar sign, which means God. Huge statues of the ruling king who gave the order to build this pylon, or temple, stand in front of it with their backs to its wall. Some of the statues show him standing on the pylon's edges, while others show him sitting on each side of the pylon's gate. They range in number from 1 pair to 2, and on occasion, up to 3 pairs. In the Luxor temple, every was carved from a monolith. The sun god Re was symbolizing by the 2 or sometimes 3 pairs of obelisks that frequently preceded the pylon. The significant actions taken by the king, or queen, to appease the god are frequently documented on the 4 sides of the obelisk, and occasionally its base, which were all carved from a monolith of pink granite stone. The grand entryway, which is located between the 2 towers, is frequently composed of granite stone and crowned with an Egyptian cornice. Its upper lintel is adorned with a winged sun disk, representing Hor-Bideti, the sun god worshipped in the city of Edfu. This entrance had a massive wooden door inlaid with bronze, silver, and gold, among other metals. Additionally, there is a stairway in one of the towers, typically the northern one, that goes up to multiple floors and multiple rooms that are lit by tiny windows like niche until it reaches the pylon's top. The front open courtyard of the temple is the area that is the widest after passing through the pylon entrance. It was known as Weskhet Hebite by the ancient Egyptians, which means the festival courtyard. A row or 2 of columns in the shape of a covered colonnade are frequently found at its back or on each side of it. Most likely, they served to shield the vibrant scenes and carvings on the walls from the sun's heat and rainfall. This open courtyard appears to have been dedicated for the assembly of different delegations from the populace engaged in religious celebrations, either divine or royal, like the festivals marking the departure and entry of the god's sacred boat and the appearance, or radiance or manifestation, of the ruling king on particular occasions and festivals. Some of the rituals of the said festival were also celebrated there. A short set of steps leads us from the open courtyard into the Hall of the Columns, whose floor is higher than the open courtyard. As its name suggests, it is filled with many papyrus columns that, in major temples that date back to the 19th dynasty and beyond, form 3 aisles. The central aisle has a roof made of enormous lintels that is based on papyrus columns with capitals shaped like mature flowers. There is a lower height and a larger aisle on either side of it. Its ceiling based on columns of papyrus with capitals shaped like papyrus buds. The height differential between the center aisle and the 2 side aisles was utilized to create stone mesh openings that let light and air pass through, in addition to narrow apertures in the roof. According to Christian Desroches' Noble Court, there is a difference in brightness between the side stems with stems that contain unopened papyrus buds, and between these stems of plants that grow in the full light and whose maturity precedes other stems, making them higher than the rest, with their umbel flowers open before other flowers. The ancient Egyptian term Weskhet Kate, which translates to Hall of Radiance, Appearance, or Manifestation, is frequently used to refer to the Hall of Columns. The texts state that the term radiance, appearance, or manifest refers to either the ruling king or the statue of the worshipped god. In this hall the appearance of God's hallowed boat was celebrated as it emerged from the Holy of Holies. Similarly, celebration greeted the newly crowned king upon his purification in the Holy of Holies. Then, In this hall he was greeted by delegations of members of people whom honoring his grandeur and celebrating his life and praying and praising his majesty. This hall was ornamented with various scenes. On the lower portions of the walls, we find the earth and the gods of the Nile carrying offerings. On the ceilings of the two aisles, we find scenes representing bright yellow stars on a blue background representing the sky. On the ceiling of the middle aisle, there is a frieze that shows vultures, or eagles, spreading their wings for protection, and possibly to show that this is the path designated for the king and the god to reach the Holy of Holies. When we reach the section related to the god, we find that nobody else was permitted to enter there, perform the daily ceremony, as the text puts it, see the god, save the king and the priest who stands in for him. The state's governing concept is that the king is the sole priest to perform daily services for all the gods in all the temples 3 times a day, but it is technically impossible. As a result, a trained priest assigns him to serve the deity in each temple. There were also a lot of men and women working in the temple to perform the work in the temple. The god's shrine, known as the Holy of Holies and termed Set word in ancient Egyptian language, which means the great throne and is also the name given to the king's throne, was the most significant shrine in this inner section of the temple. This could mean that each of them is crowned in his proper place, the king in his palace, the deity lives in his temple, and worship rites and offerings are made to him. Inside the Holy of Holies, either in a compartment located in the center of the holy boat or in a naos suitable for its size, was the statue of God or his sacred symbol. The naos, or sacred boat, was to rest on a pedestal designated in the center of the sacred of Holy of Holies. As in the Luxor temple, the Holy of Holies room and the sacred boat chamber may be divided. Arnold thinks that the god's dwellings consisted of 3 rooms. The first was a tiny space for the statue where he resided, the second housed the offerings table where the god was called upon to eat his meals, and the third was a rather large space meant to hold the sacred boat that the god traveled in. A greater secret than the secrets within the sky, a greater secret than the secrets of the netherworld, and more hidden than the inhabitants of the primordial world, according to the ancient Egyptians, was the statue of God in the Holy of Holies. Based on this, the statue was positioned within his chamber, or naos, closed over it, and then placed in a special room of its own. It's the Holy of Holies, the statue room. The daily temple service is centered upon this statue. The ancient Egyptians did not think the statue was a god, but they did think that the god's spirit might reincarnate or transmigrate within it via certain rituals. There were frequently shrines corresponded to the number of gods and goddesses worshipped in the temple, and there were often 3 shrines for the Holy Trinity, the Father, in the center, wife, right, and the Son, left, together with the side chambers housing the divine treasures, holy instruments, and the necessary items for religious rituals. It is important to observe the progressively rising floors and the progressively descending darkness that starts at the temple pylon and ends at the Holy of Holies. The floors ascend progressively from the Hall of Columns to the Holy of Holies, which its ceiling is the lowest of all the temple ceilings. In order to create awe, reverence, and a sense of mystery in the souls of those who enter this hallowed place, the open courtyard is flooded with light during the day, while the Hall of the Columns is lit dimly and the private chambers of the worshipped deity are purposefully dark. The majority of the courtyard wall's interior and external surfaces are often decorated with scenes, most of which are engraved in bas-relief and commemorate the king's military triumphs as well as some historical footage of ancient Egyptian festival processions. The majority of the Hall of Columns and the internal chambers' wall surfaces are carved with scenes that depict the king in his varied relationships with the gods and goddesses. It involves performing a religious rite, or making offerings, or in the company of a god or goddess. The main temple parts were all to be on one axis, with the road running through the center from the entrance to the Holy of Holies. This allowed for easy access for the king's procession or the god's procession, who was carried inside his naos to both the outside and inside of the temple on the shoulders of the priests and represented as a statue. It should be mentioned that certain gods, like Amun, had a religious custom in which the sacred statue is kept in a chamber within his sacred boat and was carried by priests on their shoulders, accompanied by senior statesmen during specific seasons and fixed festivals. A massive mud brick wall encircling the temple also housed the dwellings of the priests and other staff members, as was common in major temples. In addition, there were warehouses, bakeries, and a holy lake that depended on the seeping water that came from the Nile. Occasionally, a library and the Perang school, which graduate future priests to serve the temple, were also present. This is the general layout of the New Kingdom temple, but with time, some of the most significant temples in ancient Egypt started to expand. This is because the kings built pylons, courtyards, halls of columns, and other similar architectural features to ensure that the gods worshipped in the temple were satisfied and elevated in stature. As we shall see, this may appear evident in the complex of Karnak and Luxor temples. 2. Temple furnishings. In addition to the monuments within the temples that have been maintained over time, the scenes of the temples are depicted in text and images, the temple furnishings. We start with the statues of the gods and goddesses. There were small ones made of precious metals that were placed inside the nave inside the Holy of Holies, and there were big ones that were carved from stone and set in the temple courtyard. Among the statues that represent gods and goddesses are some that take human forms, such as the god Ta, some that take animal forms, such as the goddess Hathor, and some that retain the human body and take the head of an animal, such as the goddess Sekhmet, whose statues represent her in the form of a woman with the head of a lioness. It is noteworthy to mention that the statues of gods the goddesses with human heads had characteristics that reflected the features of the ruling king who had ordered them to be carved, comparable the statues of Amun and Amount from Tutankhamun's reign near the Holy of Holies in the Temple of Amun-Re in Karnak. A significant portion of the temple's furnishings were the statues of the kings and queens who took part in its construction, and were erected in front of the pylons and in the halls, courtyards, and halls of the temple. A number of them depicted the king either standing, sitting, or kneeling in prayer. Others showed him either alone or with the queen, who is frequently depicted in small-scale carvings or engravings next to his leg. Still others showed the king with one or more gods or goddesses, in which case the king assumes the center of the group, which was frequently carved from a monolith. The king may permit certain distinguished individuals, such as statesmen, ministers, priests, and engineers, to honorably erect their statues in certain locations throughout the temple, so that they can have pleasure in witnessing the gods' procession at different celebrations and to gain from the gifts offered to them. There were in the temples for little statues of gods and goddesses that were maintained in the Holy of Holies. In addition to the statues of gods and goddesses, kings, and queens, and senior statesmen, the scenes, text, and images depict their forms. These were fashioned of wood, gilded with sheets of gold, and inlaid with precious stones. These featured double-leaf doors and were rectangular in design. The sacred boat that belonged to some gods, like the god Amun, the lord of Karnak, is also included in the furnishings of the temple. It was kept on a pedestal in a special compartment or in the Holy of Holies, along with numerous offering tables that were constructed of stones if they were large or metal if they were small. Along with several other vessels, cups, dishes, incense burners, bowls, etc. fashioned of different metals and stones, in addition to the necklaces, rings, and pectorals that adorned the statue of the deified god. King Thutmose III presented his father Amun-Re with a long list of hallowed gifts at the temple of Amun in Karnak, hoping to be given life like the god Re forever. This is arguably one of the most exquisite and striking examples of this. It is located in the second Annals Hall, to the left of the Holy of Holies entrance. The king is seen standing and presenting rows of gifts. Obelisks and flagpoles were delivered to his father, the Lord of Karnak, Amun-Re, together with the holy gifts and temple furnishings. A variety of materials, including gold, precious stones, silver, bronze, copper, wood, and stones, were used to make these furnishings. The list mentioned a lot of items both in text and images, such as offering tables, golden utensils in different shapes, writing sets boxes, water basins, different types of incense burners, different types of scepters, holders for torches, special tools for the temple's founding rituals like 2 trowels, an axe, a mallet, and posts, among many other things like bracelets of various sizes, shapes, and purposes, whether they were dedicated to the sacred statue or the god's boat. Besides shrines for the gods and goddesses, there are chests for valuables, 2 shutters of a copper door as shown in the tomb of Rekamura number 100, and pedestals for the holy boat. 3 daily service in the temple. Scenes on temple walls are documented in text and images, in addition to the papyrus texts that have been preserved over time, the rituals of offering and the rituals of daily service in the temple, the latter of which is divided into 2 categories. The first type is service within the temple, which is performed by priests, servants, and assistants from a variety of professions in groups inside the temple. The second type is the regular ritualistic service, also known as worship, performed to the god statue in the Holy of Holies. It was carried out by the king or mostly by the high priest acting on his behalf, and no one else was permitted to enter the Holy of Holies. Daily prayers were offered to the statue of God in the Holy of Holies early in the morning. The king or the priest presiding over him, typically one of the god's servants Hem-Nether, would then light the torch, burn incense, open the shutters of the naos housing the statue, and offer prayers in front of it. After bowing down, he removes the statue from its naos and gives it a thorough cleaning, makeover, anointing with fragrant oils and incense, and providing nourishment. Then he puts it back where it belongs, shuts the naos, and uses a broom to remove any evidence of his feet. Until the following morning, when the rituals are renewed, the location stays closed. The service is restricted to cleaning and sanitizing the entire temple throughout the afternoon and nighttime hours. We'll now quickly discuss these rituals. As we previously indicated, the religious rites start at sunrise. Orders are given to light the ovens to produce pastries and breads, while the butcher the sacrifice animal once the farrier priest certifies that it is safe. Another group prepares a list of fruits and vegetables, all busy preparing for the daily offering. Simultaneously, we witness the priests waking up and proceeding to the lake for bodily cleansing and purification. Following this, they separate, with each one proceeding to do their assigned duties. Some of them change the water in the basins, some burn incense, and some purify the various places. Finally, the carriers of the offerings, along with the singing religious songs, make their way inside the offering hall, which is situated right next to the Holy of Holies. There, they place the food and drink offerings on the tables that have been set aside for them. After that, the priests purify it by sprinkling them with water and surrounding them with incense. The king, or a priest acting on his behalf, had to go early to what is known as Pertuit, meaning the house of the morning, a tiny chamber used for purification rituals, with natron, incense, and water, and clothing changes. According to Bargay, the house of the morning was a little room, in front of the 4th pylon of the Karnak temple of Amun, which served as the temple's facade during King Thutmose III's rule. The scenes depicting the king's purification carved on its walls indicate that the house of the morning in the Luxor temple was most likely the room to the left of the room housing the holy boat. After that, the king, or priest, proceeds to the offering room and uses a censer he is holding to burn incense on the offerings that have been brought before. Then, in a ritual known as the royal appearance or looks, he approaches the Holy of Holies holding a blazing censer in his left hand and a vessel full of purifying water in his right. Next, he gets closer to the Holy of Holies door, which is where the god figure is kept. Pulling on the bolt, he opens a door while reciting a few prayers, invocations, and supplications. The Holy of Holies then turns dark as he enters and shuts the door behind him. For this reason, the king had to carry out the rite of lighting the flame as his first ritual. Then he picks up the incense burner, sets the incense bowl over it, and tosses the incense pellets onto the blazing flame. Upon approaching the naos, he loosens the seal band, which was mostly composed of papyrus bearing a clay seal. Then he cracks the seal of clay. Subsequently, he unfastens the latch and opens the door's two leaves, revealing the god statue. This is a ritual known as seeing the god, in which the performer approaches the statue in reverence, kisses the ground or lays down on his stomach, depending on the texts. Despite the fact that the scenes indicate he is content with just simply kneeling. Subsequently, the king, or priest, stands and performs the incense ritual known as incense burning, following face uncovering with the incense burner. Then worship to the god starts, and the king enters the naos. He frequently entered twice, once to incense and the second to offer offerings. According to Tufa Handusa, which is in agreement with Marid, when the king, or priest, goes into the naos to embrace the statue, that is, to touch it in order to be blessed by it, the soul appears to be returned to the statue of God, meaning that the soul is housed within the statue. From this moment, he starts to treat the statue like a real living human being. He therefore serves it a thorough cleansing, clothes it, decorates it, anoints it with fragrant oils, and gives it food and drink. According to Son Aaron, serving food is a symbolic and spiritual act. The food and drink were offered to the statue, which housed the divine spirit, rather than the god, who did not eat or drink what was offered to him. This was done out of sight, since the food and drink spirit reached the statue's spirit without touching them. The main purpose of the offerings is to feed the souls of the gods and the deceased dignitaries. Once the god is sated and satisfied from the offerings that were piled up in front of him, which happens after a certain amount of time, and the gods accompanying him who reside in his sacred sanctuary, they are placed in front of the statues of senior statesmen who were honored to have their statues erected inside the sacred sanctuary. These offerings are brought to a pre-arranged location and divided among the temple's priests in accordance with a predetermined method, each one according to his rank as a priest. After the spirits of the gods and the deceased among the senior statesmen were satiated and content with their spiritual essence, the worldly servants continued to live off of those offerings made to the deity and enjoyed their material existence. The king, or priest, then presents the statue of the deified god with a little statue of the goddess Maat. This ritual, called the offering of Maat, symbolizes the god's spiritual sustenance in addition to food and drink. Ancient Egyptian texts state that the gods live on Maat, since it ensures their survival. It might stand for the cosmic equilibrium that keeps the universe from destruction. Following that, in a ritual known as laying arms on the god, the king, or priest, removes the statue from the naos and lays it on the ground. After that, he purifies it, dresses it, decorates it, and anoints it with fragrant oils. He cleans the naos first, then scatters sand, and last retrieves the necessary purification requirements from a box next to him, a ritual known as putting the hands around the box to perform purification. Then, he begins to wipe off the old decorations from the statue, which is the ritual of removing the clothes. Then he changes the clothes of the statue of the god. Next is the cleansing phase with water and utensils, Nemeset 4 times, Desharet 4 times, and Iab, a third time with 4 incense pellets. Next is the purification phase with incense, followed by purification with 5 lower Egyptian natron pellets and 5 upper Egyptian natron pellets. At last, the god statue's decoration is started by the king, or priest. Dressing the body, the garment, of the names is the first rite that takes place. Next came dressing the white dress, dressing the green dress, and finally dressing the red dress. Last but not least, the statue is wearing a variety of necklaces, such as the broad waistcoat and the 2 necklaces, Sebeshet and Monike. As the rites come to an end, the king, or priest, uses water and different types of incense to purify it once again. Then he puts the statue back inside the naos, closes the naos door, and uses a broom to wipe away the evidence of his footsteps. Hans Bonnet believes, the goal is not only to take care of the statue's external appearance, such as cleaning and decorating it, as an actual person does every morning, such as washing and changing clothes. But the goal of the daily rituals is to free the statue from evil spirits, give it daily the power of divine life, and make it a center for this divinity. According to Siegfried S. Morans, the statue receives its spiritual strength and vitality from the daily service ritual, since the existence of the spirit within the statue attests to the presence of God within the temple. Thus, the ancient Egyptian preserved a unique statue that represented a particular god, and he offered the statue as a sign of respect, indicating his reverence for the god embodied in it. Plutarch, citing his ancient Egyptian interlocutors, clarifies this by saying, "The issue is not that we honor these things, the statues themselves, instead, we pay homage to deity via them, provided that they are inherently the purest mirrors for displaying divinity. As a result, we have to consider these things as instruments, in the hands of, the all-powerful God who organizes everything."